Welcome to Changing Minds. I'm your host, Joe Devlin. A brand's a funny thing. It's not something you can hold in your hand, yet it's bread and butter for an organization. I saw a definition recently that I liked that said, a brand is a personality that identifies a product, service, or company that represents the relationship between constituents, including customers, staff, partners, etc. And the key word here is relationships. We have a relationship with these abstract product identities. We even go so far as to trust some brands more than others. Why is this? And what makes one brand more trustworthy than another? With me today to answer these questions is Michele O'Neill, Global Strategy Partner at Edelman, the leading independent communications company, both globally and in the UK. Welcome to Changing Minds, Michele.
Hi, Joe. Thank you for having me.
I'm so pleased to be here with you today. That's really great. Before we get started, I'd just like to invite our audience that as we go, if any questions come up, please just put them in the Q&A board and we'll try to answer as many as we can at the end of the session. So just to get us started, Michele, Edelman's been researching trust now for like 20 years or more.
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? How did it get started and what kind of trends have you seen?
Well, Richard Edelman, whose father founded Edelman, as you mentioned in the intro, we're an independent company who help clients and businesses around the world both promote and protect themselves. And in that context, trust has been a hugely important attribute or element of a company to understand. So about 20 years ago, we started doing this big quantitative study across a number of countries. Year on year, we started in 2001. To ask a number of questions around trust. We looked at trust in government, trust in the media, trust in institutions and NGOs. And more recently, we've got very, very interested in looking at trust in brands. Because to your point, the role brands play in our lives or what we allow brands to do in our lives has changed dramatically over time.
And you shared a slide with me about this 20 years. Can I just put it on the screen?
Sure, happily.
Okay. Can everyone see it now? Can you see it?
Yeah, totally. So, back in 2001, we were looking at NGOs. I mean, that whole charitable space, how that was growing. I can jump to 2009. I love trust in business was plummeting. That was a really interesting year where we were looking at how business was showing up, profit first at all times, what was really happening to the business world. In 2010, we start to see words like transparency coming into the fore. In a digital world, as we really started to be able to look behind a brand to see who the company was and how they were behaving. Jump a few years to 2018, and we were right in the middle of the soup of fake news. Yeah. So this battle for truth. How do I know that what I'm reading is truthful? And, those same platforms are still in the stew. Last year, I was fascinated with our trust report where we looked at the relationship between the employer and the employee and how when we didn't trust our government, we weren't too sure about organizations, we weren't too sure about the media, who else could I trust? I could trust my friends, my peers, and also my employer. And it was about trusting them to do the right thing. And this latest report that we've done is looked at this intersection, we wanted it to be an intersection between competence and ethics. But when we started to plot businesses, NGOs, brands, and companies, we found that they could fall in only one or t'other. So sadly, NGOs were showing up as being rather ethical, as one would expect, but not particularly competent. Government the same, government that's more competent, but where were the ethics? And what we're starting to see is this convergence where brands have this opportunity to both do what they say on the tin at a structural, physical attribute level, but also have an ideology around how they want to help culture, society, the planet. And so that's really been the shift we've seen. It's pretty amazing when you hold it up like that, isn't it? 20 years of trust. Very proud.
And it's remarkable, the shifts.
Yeah, amazing.
One of the things that really strikes me with that is that, within psychology, there's this very famous model called the stereo content model by Susan Fiske that really talks about how you develop relationships with others. And she breaks it down into two dimensions, warmth and competence, which seems to directly match, and that's for for people, for organizations. But it seems like we should perhaps be adding brands into that as well.
Absolutely. Do you want to leave that slide now?
Okay, we'll do.
Yeah.
We'll go back
yeah,
to
no,
us.
I completely agree with that. You know, our relationship to brands, though, has changed dramatically over time. I mean, do you remember the first TV ad? How old were you? What was it? Do you remember?
Wow. I think the first ad that I recall was a Wendy's ad, which is a fast food chain in the US called Where's the Beef?
Oh, yes, I remember that. The very small person looking over a counter and not being able to see the beef. Okay, so let's deconstruct that. That was an ad about a product attribute, which was Wendy's were obviously at the time saying, we've got more beef in our burger. And therefore, one way to dramatize that was to show a competitor burger where the patty was so small you couldn't see it. And that's a nice kind of joined up piece of advertising. It's fun. But fast forward, I won't ask you how many years ago that was. I'm going to say maybe the 80s.
Yeah, let's go with that.
Fast forward, what's a burger ad that's winning all the awards at the moment? It's the wonderful work from Burger King. And Burger King actually took a photo of their Whopper a couple of days out in the sun, and they showed a load of mold on it. It was the most unappetizing burger ever. But they were dramatizing something else, which is we don't have any additives, we don't have any preservatives. So, you know, 25 years ago, it was about the size of the patty. Now it's, where do your ingredients come from? What do you put in my food? How do you treat your workers? Yeah. You know, it's all those, you know, who are your partners? Who's your supply chain? You know, what are you doing in my community? We expect brands to do so much more than what they make now. And that's what's really shifted over time. So I think, you know, that burger over 25 years is a case in point. And, you know, we've just finished doing some research last week in about 12 countries, and trust in brands has now gone up to second place, only picked by price. Wow. And that's a real COVID response, isn't it?
That is remarkable.
Trusting a brand to do the right thing. I mean, it's been such a sad time sort of living through this crisis for us all, but it's been, given brand as my area of interest, it's been fascinating watching how brands have shown up. I don't know if you know, but probably just 2 weeks into the crisis, LVMH in Paris realized there was this massive shortage of hand sanitizers. So they pivoted their production line away from Givenchy and Christian Dior hand lotion and started producing sanitizers.
Wow, good for them.
It was amazing, amazing work.
Yeah, no, it is. And I think about brands like maybe Pret or Dove or Ben & Jerry's as the kind of brands that are unafraid of showcasing their values. For brands that are thinking more about bottom line or just think that this is kind of off to the side and not relevant, how are they faring at the moment, given this sort of importance with trust?
I don't think those brands will survive. They're not surviving because, quite simply, we make choices as humans. And you know, I'm in the business of influence. I'm shamelessly in the business of influence. And how do I influence people to choose my client's brand? You know, when I was a little girl growing up in Australia in the 60s, you know, a soap powder would show two washing lines, you know, one with a man's white overalls and another with a man's overalls, but they were a bit grey. So they'd be telling me that these were two women. It was telling me very clearly what their roles were in culture, is to keep their husbands clean and shiny at work, and that they were blue-collar workers. And I think the end of the commercial, when we saw the hero husband in his white overalls, told me that he was foreman material. So that gave me a lot of clues about, you know, my role in society and what was important for wives and mothers. But fast forward 50 years on, and brands have to show up and actually do something that matters. So brands that are only still telling me that they wash whiter than white, it's not enough. Because actually, if I go to the washing powder aisle, there's a lot of parity in a lot of categories. I mean, when we buy soap powder and toothpaste now, you expect them to do what they say they do. So we need to look for other emotional filters, if you will, to decide which brands we want to choose. I mean, Pret a Manger is a great example. London High Street, there's plenty of places to go and buy your food. Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
You're spoiled for choice. But Pret went out there very early on, and I remember when they launched, their napkins used to carry their ideology, if you will. You'd be sitting there with your prawn sandwich, you know, reading about this company's values.
Right.
And then when COVID happened, they were the first in to say, if you're an NHS worker, come and we'll feed you. I mean, I love that work. Yeah. And then there are human brands that have showed up. I mean, look at Joe Wicks.
Right.
Who knew from his living room in all that lycra that he could, you know, save 70 million, you know, views. It was extraordinary. I love Jamie Oliver's work as well. You know, he's a real grafter, and I love him to bits. He's really practical, and he's always trying to do the right thing. And this phrase of doing the right thing is something that shows up in our research a lot. We ask people that question, you know, do you trust government to do the right thing? Do you trust an NGO to do the right thing? And we don't actually have to articulate what that is, because we all know what doing the right thing means to us. And Jamie does that in spades. You know, he pulled that TV series together so quickly, you know, in lockdown to help people, you know, cook well and carry on and manage with what they had, because he felt that they were losing control of their lives a little bit, and that not everybody is, you know, fabulous in the kitchen. So I love those human brands as well, that do the right thing by us.
And it feels very genuine in both of those cases.
Yeah,
I mean, they're not doing it to raise their profile. They're doing it because they saw that there was a need that they thought that they could help with people.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a big fan of Dove. Dove women and the men's brand. Dove in the US, I mean, I was absolutely appalled when I heard this statistic. Something like 80% of African American women feel uncomfortable going to work wearing their hair naturally. So there's this kind of systemic racism, you know, snide remarks, jokes when women come in knots and braids and twists. So, you know, they're either putting on wigs or straightening and burning their hair and trying to almost make it not who they are. And when Dove found out about this, because they make shampoo, they didn't just say, we'll keep making shampoo. They said, we need to fix this. So what they did was they created something called the Crown Act. And with Edelman, they went in to get legislation changed. And of course, because America's federal, it was a state-by-state gig. And they're currently going state by state, getting legislation changed so that it is discriminatory for an employer to send someone home because of their hair. African American women are 1.5 times more likely to be sent home because of their hairstyle.
That's unbelievable, isn't it? I mean,
it's extraordinary.
In modern times, this is incredible.
In modern times. And Dove Men did a lovely job on paternity. They were interested in, you know, more than what they made. If they had care in the name of their brand, it's called Dove Men and Care. How could they actually show how men cared? And so they did some really interesting research and found out that a lot of fathers especially want to do more, want to help more, but in some markets it doesn't feel very machismo to take paternity leave. So in some countries where paternity leave is legislated, the problem is not enough men take it. And in other countries, it's not legislated. So that brand has gone right on in there to turn that around. Now, if you're a dad with a kid and you hear about what Dove Men and Care has done around paternity, don't you just want to pick up that deodorant rather than another that also says it'll keep you dry for 24 hours?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's great to see these organizations kind of walking the walk. It's one thing to say, you know, hey, we're really good at this. This is what we believe in. But it's another to sort of step out and then sort of fight for the public good.
Absolutely. And that's why we're seeing this rise in what we call the activism brands. And Ben & Jerry's is a gorgeous example of that. I mean, Ben & Jerry are the original brand activists, aren't they? You know, it's Woodstock in a tub.
Like hippie ice cream. Yeah, it's great.
I know, but their CEO, Matthew McCarthy, is an absolute hero of a leader. And he is so deeply involved in fixing the wrongs that need fixing. He's super involved now with the organization in really eradicating systemic racism. I mean, that's a company that already does a shed load, but they're going to do a shed load more. And, you know, he also believes in measurement. So, you know, that phrase, I always get it the wrong way around, you know, you measure what you treasure what you measure. Right. It's funny me saying that to an academic, but that this idea that you can't just talk about it, you've actually got to say we're going to do something and we're actually going to measure what we've done. And those are the businesses I'm interested in and I work with most often, because I'm not really interested in companies that just want a nice press release. It's the companies that actually say we're going to go and fix this. We're going to go change something. We're going to show you how we do it. I mean, you know, that work with Domestos last year was amazing. You know, all of a sudden there were all these toilets open. Right. You know, when they realized that, you know, that there was this problem with public loos in Britain, and they did something about it. And people love you for doing that, and so they should.
Can you remind us briefly what it is that Domestos did and how it came about?
Yeah, so Domestos, so it's a great brand of toilet cleaner, and they do amazing work around the world, I believe. And in India, they're very involved in you know, sanitation and, you know, on a much bigger scale. But when you come to developed markets like Britain, everyone's got a loo indoors and, you know, life's okay, you know, relative to developing countries. But there was a loo problem in Britain, which was that local government wasn't getting enough funding to keep public toilets open. Wow. So Domestos got involved and called this out, and then turned to businesses to say, if you're really serving your community, don't just serve them coffee, maybe try and serve them a break in the loo when they need it without having to buy a coffee. Yeah. And then, of course, all these companies that got involved and made their sort of democratized their toilets, if you will, yeah, they got payback from you know, the community saying, thank you for taking care of me. So that was at a local level. You know, that was just a UK initiative for a brand that builds toilets for schools and poor communities in India, but still has a conscience in Britain to do the right thing.
And it's nice, isn't it? Because it's an example of groups doing this not in a sort of tit-for-tat fashion. I'm sure that they genuinely felt like, yeah, no, this is the right thing to do, and we can do it. And then consumers see that and respond, right? It's very genuine again.
Kind of how it works.
Yeah, yeah. It's, yeah, it is remarkable. I mean, the examples we've been talking about have all been, you know, companies, organizations. I wonder about this at the sort of government level, because I'm thinking about Jacinda Ardern, right? The New Zealand.
Yeah, brand New Zealand, my favorite.
Yeah, right, exactly. And she feels very warm and she feels very ethical. She's competent, which gives me hope that other governments, excuse me, are capable of doing the same thing, even if we're not seeing a ton of it at the moment.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about governments, because I think when you talk about New Zealand, you're talking about Jacinda. So again, it's a human brand. I think it's brand Jacinda. I mean, I've worked on brand New Zealand before when we've sold milk to China, and what China wants to buy from New Zealand is purity. So, you know, or Steinlager beer is sort of, you know, the purity of New Zealand water. So there's all these other attributes of brand New Zealand, but Jacinda is spectacular, because even before COVID, what that woman has lived through, the massacres, you know, and she's just had so much on her plate, all of this while breastfeeding in Parliament. I mean, an extraordinary exemplar of leadership. But she's everything that we've just been talking about trust, because you implicitly trust her as a human being to do the right thing. Her moral compass, I think, as a leader is second to none. And you sense that she's putting people first.
Yes.
I'm aghast at watching Britain, the US, all of the economies, because I'll describe them as economies, because that's what's driving them. Yeah. She's driven by humanity.
And you see, I was going to say, you see that in governments, you see that in organizations where if they're not driven by the people, the employees, the citizens, the customers, then that comes through. The message is really clear. And it seems like people are increasingly looking for that when they make their decisions.
Totally. Especially the next generation. I know you've got a teenage daughter. I've got a 21-year-old son. Their BS radar is so acute. That's why they don't buy advertising. That's why so many people don't buy advertising anymore, because it's telling you a story about me, the brand. People will be more interested in seeing what you do rather than hearing what you say.
Perfect. That might be the exactly right point to put a line under this for a second and see whether what the questions we've gotten are at the moment. Let me just put over. Okay. So one of the questions that's here is, what advice would you give to tech companies embroiled in hate speech, data sharing, and fake news scandals? I can't imagine what tech companies this person might be thinking about.
Yeah, well, this is the moral compass conversation. First and foremost, I'd say contact Edelman. We have an extraordinary tech department, and we're actually right in the thick of it at the moment. So the tech team could certainly give you a sharper response. But I think in general terms, this is about people over profit. I think you have to step up. I mean, tech companies have made a lot of money and don't seem to pay very much tax either, I tend to find. Yeah. So, you know, where are we there on the moral compass? And that's even before we get to hate speech and the content that they support, or at least don't take down. So I would argue, I mean, sorry, this is the sort of the socialist of old in me, you know, going back to my days at university, getting arrested in the 70s in Melbourne. But I've always been interested in this concept of more. That's what drives capitalism, isn't it? That's what drives publicly listed companies that have shareholders. It's because people want more. They're not happy with what they've got. You know, I think the first tech company that says, we've actually got enough, now we're going to do the right thing, would probably get everybody's business.
Well, in some ways, we've seen some of these tech companies transition the other way. I mean, Google sort of famously started out with, you know, a do no wrong tagline, right? And I don't remember exactly when it disappeared, but
yeah,
it's not there anymore. And I think most of us are aware of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you just took more out of the dictionary for a year, if no one could ever use that phrase in a boardroom or on the floor of the stock exchange, I mean, where would we be if we just went with enough?
So do you think then that all companies need to be contributing to society more than just, you know, maybe you're a company that makes a really, really great widget and that's what you do and that widget's useful for people. Is that not enough now?
It is enough. I'm not saying that every brand has to go out there with a banner and, you know, take down something that they see sort of fundamentally wrong in culture. But what every brand and business has to do is show up and do the right thing. And so that means who your supply chain is, how you conduct yourselves, where you are on your taxation, your balance sheet, how you treat your employees. I mean, I just think it's fundamental. As parents, we teach our children to do the right thing. And so why is it that when we go into business, so many do the wrong thing? Is there some sort of imaginary line? Is it when you leave your garage? Is it when you drive into the office? Is it when you get off the train or when your driver opens the car door? Is there some kind of place where we flip over from being a parent who knows what the right thing is to being a leader, a boss, a CEO, a CTO who doesn't do the right thing? I don't get it.
Well, there's that, was it a P.T. Barnum quote where he said a sucker is born every minute? And he's often sort of idolized for that. You know, like, look, this is a man who knew how to separate suckers from their money. And that's the kind of entrepreneur that we need. And that feels very 19th century, maybe early 20th century. Yeah.
Absolutely. And there's Atlassian, which is an Australian tech company, Canva, another one out of Australia. I mean, I'm really interested in the younger generation who are setting up businesses because they're setting them up from scratch with purpose baked in. It's not just something that they're adding on to the brand or the business. It's actually built into why the company exists. And so I think in a lot of the startups with, you know, younger entrepreneurs, they're doing it from the baseline and building it through who they are and the people they attract to work for them. They're very clear and open about their values. I think it's harder for some more traditional companies to have to sort of turn the juggernaut around, but it still has to be done. You know, life's not easy.
And in fact, that's a perfect segue into one of the next questions that's here is that for companies that have been doing the wrong thing, or at least have been ignoring what the right thing is, how do they turn the ship around? Is it just starting these campaigns, or does that maybe come off as feeling a bit inauthentic?
Don't start a campaign. don't go anywhere near a campaign until you are doing the right thing. So where change starts is in your boardroom. And if you're a company of 2 people over the dinner table, I don't much mind where, but you have to start with who you are, why you exist, what it is you do for people and in culture. And then I think you have to go through your whole value chain and question everything you do. And imagine that someone is coming in to investigate you. You know, where are the skeletons? Or would you just be so transparent and say, everything's okay here? And then once you're confident that you are that business and you think that it will give you a competitive advantage to communicate that, then by all means do so. At the very least, communicate it to your sales team, to your employees, to your factory team, whatever business it is you happen to be in, to your category. That's the only way as citizens. We're all citizens. We're parents. We're adults. We're citizens. We're humanity. We all have to do the right thing, irrespective of where we show up at work every day.
So it starts then with that sort of self-evaluation of the organization and the practices and getting your own house in order.
Totally.
Right. Yeah, that feels, again, much more authentic and genuine. And I think for any organization, you know, full transparency is really hard because if you look in just another closet, you'll still find another skeleton, right? And I think that that's true for all of us.
Yeah.
But organizations that commit to that and then say, oh, okay, then we can do better, are the ones who you start to, you know, emphasize with.
Absolutely. And you know, businesses are on a journey. I mean, you hear that phrase a lot from CEOs when they've been found out, and then they sort of have to say, well, we're on a journey and we're trying to fix things. But I mean, to the earlier question, I really do think you do have to start with yourself and just go, what would I be embarrassed about? I go back to my, you know, to children all the time. You know, if my kid found out I was doing this,
right,
would they be okay about it? It's like, how do you have one set of values as a human, as a parent, as a partner, and a different set of values as a company?
For certain.
How does that work?
Yeah, I'm absolutely fascinated going back to the point that you said that, you know, trust has risen to the second most important factor,
yeah,
you know, in your research. And I just, that feels very authentic. Again, I feel like that's what I'm hearing and seeing. So it's fantastic to see that that's, you know, more than just an intuition. That's actually showing up in real research at this point.
It is.
Yeah. There's one final question here. We're saying that consumers, especially younger ones, are more aware of brands' ethical dimensions. How does Amazon's continued commercial success fit into this, given that it ticks a lot of those bad corporate behavior boxes like tax avoidance and underpaying workers and things like that?
That's a good one. That's a really good question.
That's a pointed one, sorry.
I won't speak to Amazon specifically, but I will speak to what I know to be true, which is the say-do gap. Mm-hmm. And you'll know about this as a psychologist, which is the gap between what we say out loud and what we actually do. And so I think there's a group of young people who may speak, you know, they can be inauthentic as well. Just because you're under 25 doesn't make you an authentic human. But, you know, if you want something super quickly and Amazon's going to deliver it and they're going to sort of send one parcel today and another tomorrow, and, you know, you're not happy, you know, maybe how they, you know, what their issues might be with their employees, but you forget all of that. You put that to the back of your mind, because what's playing out primarily for you emotionally is, I want that thing.
Right.
I want that thing from Amazon. And again, that becomes the bigger intellectual and ideological conversation about more, which I mentioned earlier. I always go back to more in my family over the dinner table. You know, do you really need it? You know, more, you've got enough. So, as I said, I don't think everyone, just because they're a Gen Z, are moral beings, but they're more moral than a lot of grown-ups. I have to think that. And they do want to change a world that we've screwed up pretty badly. But I think that's an absolute fair point. People are voting with their wallet increasingly. But then digital has made everything at our fingertips. And I too am amazed how people talk so vehemently about, you know, what's going on with pollution in the cities, but then they're happy to take Ubers everywhere and get everything delivered. I mean, I moved back to London from Sydney after a 4-year break, and I couldn't believe that it was just one giant car park. You couldn't drive anywhere,
right,
because everyone wanted the convenience of an Uber. So we're terribly human, aren't we? And flawed.
absolutely. And yeah, that's probably the subject of another webinar. That sort of the classic distinction between fast, immediate, quick, and things that you've thought about and made a more rational decision about.
Yeah, system 1, system 2, writ large.
Precisely. All right. Well, I should apologize to anybody whose questions we didn't get to. We've run out of time, and it's been such a fascinating conversation. I'd just like to thank Michele O'Neill, Global Strategy Partner at Edelman, for sharing these insights and your research. Many thanks, Michele.
My pleasure. Have a great evening.
Thank you very much. I certainly will. You too. And next week, we're going to be talking about psychology behind entrepreneurship. So I hope that you guys can join us then.